We begin with the president seething over the publication of a scathing anonymous op-ed in the New York Times. The author is said to be a senior official in the administration, and today the hunt is on to find out who that person is. And since the op-ed's release, several top officials or their offices have denied being its author, including the vice president, the director of national intelligence, Dan Coats, the secretaries of state, defense, housing, treasury, and homeland security, and the U.S. ambassador to the UN. Vice President Mike Pence was trending online yesterday because he said that the op-ed included a word that he's used in the past. That word, lodestar. Well, today, the vice president slammed the author and the New York Times.
Well, I think it's a disgrace. The anonymous editorial published in the New York Times represents a new low in American journalism. And I think the New York Times should be ashamed. And I think whoever wrote this anonymous editorial should also be ashamed as well.
The op-ed questions the president's fitness for office. The author writes that officials are, quote, thwarting Mr. Trump's more misguided impulses until he is out of office. Well, in response, the president called the official gutless and called for the New York Times to turn the person over to the government. Lawmakers have remained mostly silent on this explosive release. And here's what House Speaker Paul Ryan had to say when asked about it today.
A person who works in the administration serves at the pleasure of the president. It's a person who obviously is living in dishonesty. That doesn't help the president. So if you're not interested in helping the president, you shouldn't work for the president, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
Well, joining me now, CBS News Washington correspondent Paula Reid, who joins us from the White House. So, Paula, what's been the mood inside the White House since this op-ed was released?
I would describe it as defiant and a bit paranoid. I mean, not only is the president seething over this op-ed, he's also very upset about this book forthcoming from Bob Woodward. That book alleges that dozens of people in his own government, even in his own White House, are alleging that he is not fit to serve. I mean, this is not something that is new. There's been a lot of leaks, almost an unprecedented number of leaks from this White House, many of which are very critical of the president. But here it seems to have reached a fever pitch. But as you saw there, White House officials coming out and slamming not only the anonymous op-ed, but also the New York Times for publishing it.
You know, we know that the president has tweeted about this, treason, calling it deep state, and also claimed that the swamp he's trying to drain is fighting back. Are there any concrete actions that the White House could take to combat this? And do you think that they could ultimately force the New York Times to reveal their source here?
I really don't think they have any ground, legally speaking, to force the New York Times to reveal the identity of this person. There are some potential legal avenues when it comes to leaks, but he really doesn't have any great options there because, first of all, he would need to argue that this fit under some sort of broad national security protection. And while the definition under the law for that is pretty broad, I think it would be difficult to make that case here. Now, the other option is to ask the Justice Department to pursue a leak investigation. But if the Justice Department was to pursue a leak investigation, you would essentially be admitting that whatever was revealed is true. Now, the White House can also pursue its own leak investigation, but really there are no good legal avenues here. It would be best, it seems, for the president to really focus on a political response, which is what he is doing, which is pointing to his supporters and say, look, this is the deep state, this is the sort of swamp that I'm trying to drain. As I drain it, they are trying to bite back. That seems to be what he's doing here. And compared to his legal options, that really seems like the best bet for damage control.
And we know yesterday the tweet came out from former White House official Omarosa saying, look at page 330 of my book. This might reveal who that source is. Does the White House internally, do you know, Paul, if they know who they believe? Do they have somebody they believe is behind this?
There's one source who suggested to me that the president believes this is likely someone in national security or in the Justice Department. And Rena, you saw that graphic that you put up. There is one agency that is conspicuously absent, and that is the Justice Department, which is constantly the target of the president's ire. I reached out to them earlier today. It is not clear whether or not they will issue any sort of response as other cabinet officials and other agencies have done. But that is one theory, working theory within the White House.
Hey, speaking of DOJ, I want to ask you a question about the DOJ. I know you've covered this extensively. They just announced charges against a North Korean programmer. This is in connection to multiple cyber attacks, partially including the 2014 Sony attack. What can you tell us about this, Paula?
That's right. Today, the Justice Department unsealed charges against a North Korean hacker, someone who was working on behalf of the North Korean government, and they charged him in numerous cyber attacks. The most high profile was, of course, the 2014 attack on Sony Pictures Entertainment. But he was also charged for creating the malware used in a 2017 ransomware attack, as well as a 2016 theft of $81 million from the Bank of Bangladesh. Now, this is not the first time that the Justice Department has filed charges against someone hacking on behalf of an adversarial nation. They've done this with Russia, with China, with Iran, and now North Korea. But, Rena, one of the complications with taking this approach is that we don't have an extradition treaty with any of those countries. So usually what happens is these charges are announced to great fanfare, but no one is ever actually arrested, nor do they ever see the inside of a U.S. courtroom. So some folks have questioned whether or not this really has any sort of deterrent impact.
Yeah, I get the deterrent aspect. I'm just curious, Paul, when the DOJ makes this sort of decision to announce charges like this, is it in coordination with the White House? Because it's slightly strange yesterday. It comes on the same day the president tweeted his thanks to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. So why would you thank somebody when you know you're going to press charges against him?
That's right. It does not seem that the Justice Department and the White House are completely on the same page here. Usually when there's any sort of national security case from the Justice Department, there is coordination with the White House, with the National Security Council, with their components here. We are asked at a briefing earlier today whether or not there was any sort of interagency coordination on this. And they said, yes, there was some, but they would not specify who they spoke with, what kind of coordination there was, and whether the president was notified. It is also notable that these charges were actually originally filed back in May. They were just made public today. And of course, when these were originally filed, this would have been around the same time as the North Korean summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. So there were some questions about whether or not these were withheld so as not to complicate that summit any further and why they were released today. But the Justice Department was not able to give us any answers about why these charges were made public today.
You know, Paula, I got a fortune cookie on Saturday that said, "May you live in interesting times." I guess that fortune applies to all of us.
I think it absolutely does, and it probably will for the foreseeable future.
Absolutely. All right, Paula, thank you so much. Lots of twists and turns. Paula Reid coming to us from the White House.